My invitation to address a workshop that was held under the title Acting Out Technology. And I was asked to be a respondent to a group of people, including Geert Lovink, Chris Kondik, Karen Lancel, Eric de Bruyn, Laurence Lassalle, and it took up a number of topics having to do with the relationship of technology, digital technology in particular, theater, performance, and art practices of various sorts. Of particular interest to me was this relationship of digital technologies, particularly at this moment. I think this is a very interesting moment, a moment where you have a kind of falling away of the digital, which means that we have a more complex relationship between the digital and non-digital, or the actual. So we've moved from a period of technical reproducibility to one of ambient findability. And with that kind of globalized technology, then the relationship of the body, of performance, of community, and forms of interaction which are not interactivity in the usual sense, which is usually fairly simple, but forms of interactivity which cross over different boundaries, technical, physical, material, conceptual, are very interesting. I think we're at a particularly interesting moment right now. It's a very good question. I think a lot of art nowadays is still, in a sense, fixed or arrested, captured within much older forms of distribution and commerce. I think that the infrastructure for making of artworks commodities is still a very, very strong influence, and even digital artworks are treated like commodities. To make a museum or an archive of digital artworks is a very curious thing, because the model that's still used is that somehow you have an armature to collect them, you have an economic relationship, as in the case of certain well-known artists, where a technically reproducible medium which costs you something like 27 cents to produce is sold for tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars. So I think that will very much change. I think that the again, we're at a very interesting point in the relationship between the digital and the, well, solid, and that solid things will persist for a long time. They won't go away, but they're actually very new, very interesting forms that are coming up. And questions of ownership, of legality, open source questions, questions of even the very stability of artifacts are being recast anew. Yeah, it's a question that's tied up with all sorts of things. What do you show? One example is a particularly interesting and digital form, something called code work, as practiced by people like Mackenzie Wark or Alan Sondheim or Challen Memot and various other people, and where you actually have a kind of aesthetics which is an aesthetics of the algorithm, an aesthetics of programming, of the shape or the extent or the effects of programming. And what happens is very curious. It produces a series of texts, but when you look at the text, you look at them and to some extent, one can say, but this is unreadable, you can't read it at all. So, but it's really the process. I think that the code work in particular is very interesting in its performative dimension, and in a way, indeed, you can't read it, but the elegance, the aesthetics, the art form, if you will, is something which is active and fluid, digital. It exists in the forms and patterns and traces of transmission. And when you arrest it, fix it as an object, a text, a printout, it's not so very interesting. So that's something really quite new. So what do you do with objects? What do you do with images? Images change a lot. If you look at what people do with machinima type things, where, for example, you have a gaming environment, a game space, which is used not to conduct a point on or a pluralized point on game, but you have that gaming environment made into a series of events or opportunities for narrative, and stories are told and stories are added to and continued indefinitely. You have basically a story, a world of infinite extent and indefinite boundaries. Our ideas of the image are changing very much. Our notions, we are finally, in a way, weaned from the idea that of that reflex that we have about photography, that it has a kind of automatic claim to verisimilitude, to reality. We know very well, and have known for some time, that that's not the case. In fact, photography has always had the capacity to show something which is not the case. So photography is changing in the way that we perceive it. I'm very interested. When I talk about the falling away of the digital, I'm also talking about the way in which our perception of the digital, which is actively involved in the digital, is changing with the digital. For example, what Derrida and Stiegler are talking about is that speech then becomes an artifact. They call it an artifactuality. It's certainly the case in some digital technologies. Perception itself becomes an artifact. And what are the consequences of the artifactuality of perception? A perception where you see that the human sensorium, which is engages in a continuum from alterity, difference, and unfamiliarity, to a greater and greater degree of domesticity. Well, at a certain point in that continuum, you pass the boundary of the extent of your own flesh, and you are engaged in a series of what McLuhan has called extensions of media. So subjectivity now is, I think, a hybrid field of technology and sensibility. And the new frames take its place, not just in virtual simulations and environments like that, but in terms of extended stories, role-playing, and games where you have an active, mobile, and motile point within a story, and you actually have a relationship that mimics your own somatic disposition, and you actually have to turn around to see what's behind you. So the very disposition of the spectator is different. Work is different. How do we work? When you work remotely, you are in one, you can always be found. It's ambient findability. All the devices we use, cell phones, laptops, and whatever, they're all GPS capable. They're all capable of finding, recording, tagging, locating you. And there again is another form of this passing away of the digital, because finding you is literally physically locating you someplace in the world. The question of authority will also be mapped into distributed networks. The notions we have of egalitarianism, of equality, of democracy, but also of hierarchy, of power, of force, of knowledge and representation and its containment, all these things too will be mapped into those representations that come back at us as the spaces we work within. My pleasure. Thank you.